Welcome to Bite Size Podcast on how to unlock your mind for manifestation. Okay, let's really get into what this means for you. This idea of manifesting, it's not some, woo-woo concept.
Not at all.
Think of it as being, well, deeply connected to how your brain actually works. How often do you find yourself thinking, if only I had X, then I'd finally be happy? That X could be anything, right? A better job, maybe a loving partner, more money.
The usual suspects.
Exactly. But what if that feeling, that sense of something missing, what if it isn't really about what's out there, but what's happening, inside your own mind?
Well, what's truly interesting, and maybe a bit surprising, is that you're already manifesting things in your life all the time.
Already? How so?
It might not feel intentional, but look at the patterns, maybe in your relationships or your career path. These often reflect the underlying stories, the beliefs you hold about yourself.
Ah,
It's like your internal narrative is constantly sort of shaping your external reality, unconsciously a lot of the time.
right. And those negative thoughts that creep in, that little voice.
The inner critic.
Yeah, that inner critic telling you you're not capable or you don't deserve it. It's like building a wall around yourself, isn't it? Brick by negative brick.
It is a prison, really.
But the incredible thing is, and this is so empowering, you hold the tools. You hold the key to, dismantle that wall.
Absolutely. Which makes you wonder, doesn't it, how quick we sometimes are to judge others. Without even a glimpse into the challenges they've navigated, the baggage they might be carrying. Everyone deserves to be heard, to be seen with kindness, with understanding.
And that's exactly why we're diving deep into this today. We're joined by an extraordinary guide, a Stanford neurosurgeon and neuroscientist. His work in understanding the brain is truly remarkable.
Well, thank you.
And he's going to help us understand the science behind manifesting and visualization. Our goal today, our mission is pretty straightforward. Explore how we can use these scientific insights to, move towards the outcomes we truly desire in our lives. So let's start with a really fundamental question. How can just grasping these principles actually lead to, real change in someone's life?
Well, I think for many people, the biggest hurdle is believing those negative voices inside their own head.
That inner critic again.
Yeah.
Huh?
That constant self-doubt creates these invisible limits, on what we think is possible for ourselves. We get stuck in these loops, negative thinking just takes over. But the truth is, the power to shape your circumstances, it resides within you, far more than you might realize. It's really about recognizing your own agency.
Your own power.
Exactly. You can't just wait for some external force, the universe or whatever, to magically fix things, as I've often said, kind of bluntly. The universe, well, it doesn't really operate on the scale of our individual desires. The power to shift your reality comes from within you. Believing that, truly believing it, that's the first big step.
That really shifts the perspective, doesn't it? From sort of hoping for something external to happen to cultivating that internal power.
Precisely. And I can tell you this from my own life. Growing up, my family faced pretty significant challenges. My father struggled with alcoholism. My mother had a stroke. It left her with partial paralysis, depression. There was even a suicide attempt.
Wow. That's incredibly difficult.
It was. We faced eviction, relied on public assistance. In those moments, honestly, hope can feel like a very distant memory. But as I discovered, and I shared this in my book, Into the Magic Shop, an unexpected encounter, I was in a magic shop, of all places, with this kind woman, it just shifted everything for me.
That sounds like a truly pivotal moment.
It really was. And we're so quick to make assumptions about others, aren't we?
Oh, yeah.
We often don't see the invisible struggles, the things they carry. Everyone just deserves to feel heard. This woman in the magic shop, Ruth, she had this incredible warmth, a genuine smile that made a scared 12-year-old boy feel, safe.
Safe. That's huge.
It's crucial because when you feel psychologically safe, your body's stress response actually calms down. Your physiology changes. She simply treated me with kindness, didn't judge me, looked me in the eye like an equal.
Wow.
That single interaction, it just rerouted the course of my life because it fundamentally changed how I viewed myself and how I viewed the world around me.
You've spoken and written about that interaction with such deep emotion. What makes it resonate so strongly with you, even now?
Well, on one level, there's just immense gratitude, of course. But beyond that, having someone genuinely see you, acknowledge your humanity, take a real interest, it's profoundly impactful.
Yeah, imagine.
And it's something I try hard to remember in my own interactions. So many people are silently struggling, carrying heavy emotional burdens from their past, and that baggage, it often dictates what they believe is possible for them.
Right, those limits again.
Exactly. And sometimes the simplest act of truly listening, just being present, can be transformative. Because what we all crave, really, at our core, is to be heard. It might just be a simple hello, a brief moment of connection, maybe even a hug. You should never underestimate the power of your own interactions. And remember this too, how someone treats you often reflects their own internal landscape, their own issues, not necessarily anything about you personally.
That's a really good point.
So extending a little grace, a little understanding, it can go a long, long way.
That's a powerful reminder to try and lead with empathy.
Exactly. You know, when you come from a challenging background, there are often sort of two main pathways people take. One can lead to negative outcomes, struggles with addiction, mental health issues, and so on. The other path is often this drive to overachieve, to prove something.
Right, I've seen that.
But even that path kind of diverges. Some overachievers develop this, I did it all on my own, bootstrap mentality, so why should I help anyone else kind of attitude.
Yeah.
Then there's the other group, which, well, I likely fall into, maybe even excessively sometimes, a really deep understanding of others' pain. I'm very sensitive to it, honestly. I often find myself quite emotional because of it. And, I don't think I've ever quite articulated why I feel such a strong pull to help others before. So thank you for that question. It's been insightful for me, too.
Well, it speaks volumes about your deep well of compassion. And it connects to something I've noticed about you. You consistently end your own podcast by telling your listener that you love them. It seems to stem right from this fundamental human longing, doesn't it? To feel heard, to feel loved.
Absolutely. And it's a sad truth, but so many people live in a constant state of fear, just operating from that fear mode. And that has significant negative consequences on our well-being, our health, everything.
Yeah.
Shifting into a mode of love, or what I sometimes call a heart-centered state, it can be incredibly difficult when you're facing numerous challenges that just pull you away from your true self, from that core of connection. And I believe the gift we can offer each other really is a sense of hope. Just a glimpse of what possibilities truly exist.
I want to really focus on that moment in the magic shop, the one that had such a profound and lasting impact, so that the person listening right now can perhaps see themselves, or maybe someone they care about, in your story. Can you describe how you felt emotionally, as a 12-year-old walking into that shop, carrying the weight of all those hardships, and how that seemingly small interaction with a stranger could have such a transformative effect?
Well, in my situation at home, whenever things became really overwhelming, the arguments, the difficulties, my way of coping, my escape, was to hop on my bike and just ride.
Get away.
Yeah, I'd ride as far and as fast as I could. On one of these rides, I found myself quite a distance from home in this small strip mall I didn't usually go to. Now, I'd been fascinated by magic for a while. I even had one of those little plastic thumbs, for tricks.
Oh, yeah. The classic fake thumb.
That's the one. My son actually has one now. It's funny. And, well, I'd lost it. So my initial reason for going into the magic shop was actually just to find a replacement plastic thumb.
Just a simple mission.
Very simple. But as I walked in, I noticed this woman behind the counter. I remember her so clearly. She was probably in her mid-50s, wearing a blue and white muumuu. Remember those flowy dresses?
Vaguely, yes.
She was a kind-faced woman, flowing gray hair, glasses perched right on the end of her nose with one of those little chains. She was engrossed in a paperback book.
She sounds like she could have stepped right out of a storybook.
She certainly had that kind of presence. Anyway, she looked up from her book, and I started asking her about magic tricks. She explained she was just looking after the shop for her son while he ran an errand. Babysitting the store, she called it.
Okay.
But that led to a conversation between us, just chatting. After about 20 minutes or so, she said something that really surprised me. She said, I really like you. I think I can help you. I'll be here for another 6 weeks. If you come by every day, I think you could learn a lot.
Wow, just like that.
Just like that. I had absolutely no idea what she meant. I mean, this was way before terms like mindfulness or neuroplasticity were common knowledge.
Right.
But I did go back every single day. Now, I have to be completely honest. It wasn't because of some deep insight or sudden self-awareness on my part. No. I was a poor 12-year-old kid who felt utterly hopeless, really. But I showed up, and the reasons were pretty simple. One, I had absolutely nothing else to occupy my time.
Yeah.
And two, she gave me chocolate chip cookies. Every day.
Laughing slightly.
Sure.
Okay, cookies are a powerful motivator.
They really were. So those are the main motivators for my daily visits back then.
Sometimes it truly is the simplest things, isn't it, that create the biggest shifts.
Absolutely. But looking back now, I realize she must have had some understanding of, Eastern meditation practices or something similar. And she essentially taught me what we now call mindfulness.
Without even using the word.
Exactly. What I hadn't recognized at the time was that as a child, growing up in that environment, I was living in a constant state of high alert, hypervigilance, a perpetual state of trauma, really, because the environment was so unpredictable.
Always waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Constantly. There was chaos. You couldn't rely on stability. As a result, my muscles were always tense. I was always scanning my surroundings and focusing. Well, focusing was nearly impossible.
And learning needs focus.
Absolutely. Learning requires focus. You need to be present to absorb information. And Ruth, she intuitively understood this. She started by teaching me a simple relaxation technique, just how to consciously relax my body. And then she guided me on how to focus my attention, just hold my attention on one thing.
Okay, starting with the basics.
Yes, but perhaps the most critical lesson, the one that really stuck, was that the constant negative self-talk rattling around in my head, it wasn't the truth. So often we tell ourselves we're not good enough, not worthy of love, that there's some fundamental flaw within us.
That inner critic is so powerful and just feels so convincing sometimes.
It can be incredibly convincing. And as humans, we have this inherent negativity bias, right? Negative thoughts just tend to stick with us more readily than positive ones.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And this often leads to rumination, that endless cycle of negative thinking, going over and over the same worries. Once you internalize beliefs like it's not possible for me or I can't do it, they become your perceived reality. They actually shape your limitations.
So what did she teach you to do about it?
Well, she taught me a technique to consciously respond to those negative thoughts with positive self-affirmations. But just as importantly, she taught me not to engage with the negative feelings, not to fight them, but to simply let them drift by without judgment, like clouds passing in the sky.
Okay. Acknowledge but don't latch on.
Precisely. While actively nurturing positive thoughts within myself, this fundamentally altered how I viewed the world. Because when you're constantly critical of yourself, that critical lens colors your entire perception of everything and everyone.
Makes sense.
What I often share with people is that once I began to understand the workings of my own mind, thanks to her, it shifted my perspective to one of greater kindness and compassion. Not just for myself, but for others too. It also lessened the anger I held towards my parents.
How so?
Because I began to see that they, too, were likely grappling with their own pain, their own limitations, and probably lacked the tools to effectively manage it or support me in the way I needed. That realization was significant, as was the understanding we talked about earlier that people carry their own burdens, and their reactions often have very little to do with you personally.
Right.
So cultivating a more thoughtful, gentle, and compassionate approach to interacting with others, I believe that's incredibly powerful.
It sounds like she equipped you with these incredible tools, not just for your own well-being, but also for navigating the complexities of human relationships. And then you went on to become a neurosurgeon. How and when did this idea of manifesting really come into play in your journey? And what connections did you start to see between your work as a neurosurgeon and this understanding of the mind's potential?
Well, the other key piece of our time together in the magic shop, besides the mindfulness type practices, was that at the end of these sessions, we would have these discussions. And these discussions often revolved around the concepts of manifesting and visualization.
Wait, so she introduced you to these ideas, manifestation and visualization, when you were just 12 years old back then?
Yes, that's right.
Wow. That's really early. Most people don't even hear about these concepts until much later, if at all.
It was definitely unusual for the time.
Wow.
And she started by asking me to create a list of 10 things that I truly desired.
Okay, a manifestation list.
Essentially, yes. Now, you have to remember, this was through the eyes of a poor 12-year-old kid in 1968. So in a fairly typical way, I suppose, my list included things like becoming a millionaire, which back then felt like an absolutely unimaginable sum of money.
Right.
Owning a mansion, becoming a doctor. But if I'm really honest with myself, my motivation for wanting to be a doctor back then wasn't purely altruistic, not at 12.
No.
There was definitely a part of me that craved that external validation, the recognition that I was okay, that I'd made it. I also listed wanting a Porsche, a Rolex watch.
The classic symbols.
Exactly. All these external material possessions that our society often equates with success and supposedly happiness.
Yeah, the narrative we're sold.
Precisely. The underlying belief, which is just so pervasive, is that if you acquire these things, somehow that void, that inner ache we sometimes feel, will magically be filled. But of course, it rarely, if ever, does.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, our society often steers us towards seeking that external validation with the false promise that achieving the societal definition of success, money, power, status will automatically lead to happiness. And this is a story that's been told countless times, and yet it consistently falls short. I'm sure you've encountered or know of many outwardly successful individuals who are, in reality, deeply unfulfilled.
You know, as I'm listening to you, and I'm just struck by your ability to articulate these complex ideas with such clarity, and also the deep connection you clearly have to why this is so important, not just for you, but I think for everyone listening, to understand something you just said really resonates. We all kind of intellectually understand that chasing external things doesn't guarantee happiness. We hear it all the time.
We do.
But I think you're pointing to a deeper psychological driver here. It's not just the belief that these things will make you happy. It's that for someone who has perhaps felt invisible or less than, those who possess these markers of success are seen. They get attention, respect maybe.
That's a huge part of it.
And that feels like a much more profound motivation than just the pursuit of happiness itself. That fundamental human need to feel valued, to feel like you matter, to be treated with dignity and care. I haven't really heard anyone connect the dots so clearly between that sometimes obsessive focus on external status symbols and that deep underlying need for connection and belonging. We think that acquiring these shiny objects will somehow fulfill that need, but you're saying it just doesn't.
It doesn't, not in any lasting, meaningful way. And I believe that's a significant challenge for so many people because they've been sold this narrative, this bill of goods, and ultimately it's a narrative rooted in unhappiness and fear.
Fear? How so?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, when you're driven primarily by the need for external validation, it often stems from your own insecurities, right? A fear of not being good enough. And that physiologically activates your sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, or freeze response.
Stress mode.
Yeah, exactly. Stress mode. And when that system is chronically engaged, which it is for so many people in modern life, it has a detrimental impact not only on your brain function, but also on your physical health. It can potentially lead to significant illnesses and even a reduced lifespan.
Wow.
Conversely, when you consciously shift your internal state towards what I call the love mode or heart mode, as you put it, and by that I mean consciously engaging your parasympathetic nervous system, that's the state in which we as a species are actually designed to thrive.
Our natural state.
Yes.
Yeah.
We weren't meant to be in a constant state of stress. The stress response is meant to activate in the face of immediate threat, prompt action, and then ideally return to a state of calm, of balance. The parasympathetic nervous system is where caring, connection, creativity, and well-being reside.
Okay.
It's where the release of neurochemicals like oxytocin, often called the love hormone, in response to caring for others activates our pleasure and reward centers. This love mode optimizes our cognitive functions and our physiology, making it the ideal internal state for our intentions to actually manifest.
Let me see if I can simplify that a bit just for myself and for anyone listening, because those are some big concepts. You've used the terms fear mode and heart mode, which I find really helpful and intuitive. If I'm understanding you correctly, fear mode basically aligns with our sympathetic nervous system that's stressed out, fight or flight response that can shut us down to possibilities and connection.
That's right. Limits your view.
And heart mode corresponds to our parasympathetic nervous system, that state of calm, connection, openness, and where that potential for manifestation and fulfillment really lies. Is that a helpful way to think about it?
Yes, absolutely. That's a perfect way to frame it. And when you are operating primarily from that heart mode, everything begins to shift in a positive direction. The potential for your intentions to take root and grow is significantly increased.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So going back to your experience with Ruth in the magic shop, how did this incredible woman actually teach you to manifest when you were just 12? What did that look like?
Well, I have to be honest. Again, initially I was quite skeptical. It all seemed a bit, well, unbelievable to me.
Like magic.
Like magic, exactly. But mostly because I had simply never been exposed to anything remotely like it before. The idea of intentionally relaxing my muscles or using specific breathing techniques to calm my nervous system, these were completely new concepts to me, just foreign.
Right.
So it took some time for me to truly grasp their power. But once I started practicing, I realized how profoundly they could impact that constant negative self-talk and the underlying fear I carried.
You started to feel different.
I did. And as we know now, these types of mindfulness practices, which are so widely discussed and have positively impacted countless lives today, they are readily accessible to everyone. Fundamentally, what she taught me was this combination of techniques: relaxation exercises, methods for focusing my attention, strategies for challenging that negative self-talk, and all within this framework of cultivating a more compassionate worldview. We also discussed visualization quite a bit. She emphasized that for visualization to be most effective, you need to be in that relaxed and calm state first, in heart mode.
Right, not trying to visualize from fear mode.
Exactly. And she highlighted a really crucial distinction: the difference between focusing on what one wants, which is often material or external, versus focusing on what one truly needs, which often revolves around service, connection, meaning.
Wants versus needs. Can you give an example?
Sure. On my childhood list, I wanted a Porsche and a Rolex. The underlying driver, as we discussed, was likely a desire for external validation, to feel important.
Right.
In contrast, wanting to be a doctor in order to help people carries a completely different intention, a different energy. One is primarily self-focused, often driven by a sense of lack. The other is outward-focused, rooted in a desire to contribute, to serve.
The why behind it matters.
Immensely. She explained that as human beings, we are inherently designed for service. It's wired into us. When we act in service to others, it not only activates optimal physiological states within us, that heart mode, but it also provides a deep sense of purpose and meaning.
Purpose and meaning, not just fleeting happiness.
Exactly. And research, like the work on Blue Zones by Dan Buettner, or the long-running Harvard study of adult development led by Robert Waldinger, consistently shows the profound health and well-being benefits of caring for others, of strong social connections. And it's from this service-oriented mindset, this heart mode, that the potential for our intentions to manifest is truly maximized.
You touched on this idea that human beings are wired for service. As someone who's obviously thought deeply about the mind and having worked closely with figures like the Dalai Lama, can you elaborate a bit more on how this inherent wiring for service connects so directly to our well-being? Why are we built that way?
Well, if we look at our evolution as a species, unlike many other animals, we tend to have a relatively small number of offspring at any given time. And those offspring require an incredibly extensive period of care and nurturing, well over a decade, usually more. Now, why would nature design us to invest such significant time, resources, and energy in caring for our young unless there was some kind of powerful reward mechanism built in?
Makes sense. There has to be a payoff.
Exactly. And that reward comes in the form of those neurochemicals we talked about, like oxytocin, the love hormone. When these are released through acts of caring, connection, nurturing, our pleasure and reward centers in the brain are activated, our physiology functions optimally, and we naturally adopt a more caring and loving perspective because we are innately driven to ensure the survival of our offspring, our kin.
So it feels good to care.
It feels good because it is good for our survival. And as our species evolved, living in these tribal communities of maybe around 150 people, what anthropologist Robin Dunbar called Dunbar's number, cooperation and caring for others within that group, became absolutely essential for survival in a challenging environment. These are deeply ingrained genetic imperatives that have allowed our species to thrive for millennia.
It's literally in our DNA.
It really is. We are not designed biologically to live in a chronic state of sympathetic nervous system activation, that fear mode. Our natural evolved state as a species is to operate primarily within our parasympathetic nervous system, which is characterized by openness, generosity, caring, connection, and love.
Heart mode.
Heart mode. The challenge in modern society, arguably, is that the structure of our current systems for many people unfortunately triggers a chronic activation of that sympathetic nervous system, that fear mode, diverting us from our inherent purpose, which I truly believe is fundamentally about loving, connecting with, and caring for one another.
I love that framing, and I really appreciate how you've simplified it to this core idea of being in either fear mode or heart mode, and that our inherent wiring, our biology, actually leans towards that heart mode, towards connection and love. It's our default if we let it be.
That's a great way to put it.
So with that understanding, can you break down for us as clearly as possible what manifesting actually is? How do you define it? and teach it to people around the world, stripping away the misconceptions.
Okay, so as you rightly pointed out earlier, the term manifestation often gets mixed up with a lot of, well, woo-woo ideas and sometimes outright pseudoscience.
Yeah, it has that reputation.
It does, and unfortunately some individuals exploit these concepts, often for financial gain, making promises that aren't really grounded. However, the core ability to manifest, to bring intentions into reality, is actually grounded in solid neuroscience. There's no mystical magic formula, no simplistic law of attraction in the way it's often portrayed of, those ideas with roots in early philosophical movements like New Thought and later prosperity gospels, suggesting that just thinking positively will magically attract material desires to you.
Right. It's not just wishful thinking.
Not at all. The reality is far more about understanding and utilizing how our own brains function. So scientifically, I define manifestation as the ability to take a specific intention, a goal, a desired state, and embed it deeply into your subconscious mind in such a way that it significantly increases the likelihood of it actually occurring, or, as you said, manifesting in your external reality.
Now, embedding it in the subconscious. How does that work?
Well, what many people don't realize is the sheer volume of sensory information our brains process every single second. We're talking millions and millions of bits of data from our senses. Yet, our conscious awareness, what we're actively paying attention to, can only handle a tiny, tiny fraction of that. Maybe 40 bits per second, some estimate.
Wow, that's a huge difference.
It's vast. However, within that limited conscious capacity, we do have a degree of control over where we direct our focus. Manifestation, then, involves using specific tools and techniques to effectively embed our chosen intentions into that incredibly powerful, vast subconscious realm that processes everything else.
And you mentioned a key principle earlier. What fires together wires together.
Exactly. That's a fundamental principle of neuroplasticity, often attributed to psychologist Donald Hebb.
Yes, we've definitely heard that phrase before, but can you explain it in a simple way again for someone who might be new to this idea of brain wiring?
Certainly.
Yeah.
Think of it like creating pathways or trails through a dense forest. The first time you walk a certain route, it's difficult. You have to push through branches. But if you walk that same path repeatedly, day after day,
it becomes easier, clearer.
Precisely. The path becomes well-worn, easier to navigate. Your brain works similarly. When you repeatedly think a certain thought, feel a certain emotion, or perform a certain action, the connections between the neurons involved in that pattern become stronger, more efficient. It's like paving that path. This repetition essentially wires those neurons together, making that thought pattern or behavior more automatic, more ingrained.
Like forming a habit in the brain.
Exactly like forming a habit. So when it comes to intention, by using multiple senses to engage with that intention repeatedly, you're essentially creating and strengthening these specific neural pathways in your brain. You're embedding that intention more deeply in your subconscious and, importantly, activating different cognitive networks associated with making things happen.
Okay, so how do we use multiple senses for this?
Well, for example, if you have a specific intention, you can physically write it down. That engages your tactile sense, the physical act of writing. Then you read it silently to yourself, engaging your inner voice. Next, you read it aloud, engaging your auditory sense, actually hearing the words. Finally, you visualize it. Create a vivid mental movie of it, engaging your visual sense, feeling the emotions associated with it already being real.
Writing, reading silently, reading aloud, visualizing.
Yes. And doing this consistently, repeatedly, reinforces those neural connections. It makes the intention more real to your brain.
Okay, let's break that down step by step again, just to make sure everyone listening has a really clear understanding of the practical process.
Oh.
So it starts with having a specific intention, clearly defined.
Yes, clarity is key.
Then the steps you outlined are, 1, physically write it down, 2, read it silently to yourself, 3, speak it aloud, and 4, create a vivid mental image of it, feeling the feelings.
That's the core multisensory process.
And you recommend doing this repeatedly. Daily, maybe?
Consistency is crucial. Yes, daily practice is ideal for embedding it deeply. This multisensory process helps because it activates different areas of your brain simultaneously, strengthening the overall neural network associated with that intention.
Okay, and you mentioned brain networks before. Which ones are involved here?
Right, so once the intention starts getting embedded, it begins to influence important brain networks. One we discussed is the default mode network.
Is that the same as the reticular activating system, the RAS, that some people talk about in manifestation?
They are related in the sense that they both play a role in attention and how we filter information, but they are distinct networks. The default mode network, DMN, is most active when your mind isn't focused on a specific external task, when it's wandering, daydreaming, reflecting on the past, planning the future, or engaged in self-referential thought. Thinking about me.
Okay, the mind-wandering network.
You could call it that. It's where we often construct our internal narrative, our story of who we are, what we believe, and what we desire. So if your default mode network is habitually filled with negative self-talk, like I'm not good enough or things never work out for me, it constantly reinforces those limiting beliefs during those idle moments.
And that constant replay of negative thoughts in the DMN is what leads to that feeling of being stuck or limited, trapped in that narrative.
Precisely. It becomes your brain's default setting. But the really exciting news, the hopeful part, is that we absolutely have the capacity, through neuroplasticity, to reprogram this default mode network. We can consciously lay down new neural pathways that support more positive, empowering beliefs and intentions. This ability is with us constantly at any age, regardless of past experiences.
We can actually change our default settings.
We can. Now, once an intention is effectively embedded in the subconscious through that repeated multisensory practice, it creates what neuroscientists call salience.
Salience. Okay, and what does salience mean exactly in this context? How did that help?
Salience essentially means importance or relevance. The intention becomes important enough to your brain that it starts to stand out from the background noise. It grabs your attention.
Like hearing your name in a noisy room.
Exactly like that. Once something becomes salient, it activates another key network, sometimes called the task-positive network, or more specifically, involving areas like the salience network itself, the attention network, and the executive control network.
Okay, so salience triggers these other networks.
Yes. Think of salience as the flag that says, hey, this thing is important. The salience network detects that. Then, the attention network directs your cognitive resources, your focus, your awareness towards things related to that now salient intention. It's like programming your internal radar, or, as an analogy I sometimes use, like a bloodhound honing in on a specific scent. Your brain starts noticing things it previously filtered out.
Opportunities, resources,
There are
ideas.
checklists that were always there, perhaps, but weren't relevant to your old programming. Finally, the executive control network, largely in your prefrontal cortex, kicks in to help you plan, make decisions, and take actions that align with, and ultimately help you pursue and realize what's now flagged as important in your subconscious.
So it's not magic. It's the brain doing its job once you give it clear instructions.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's fundamental neuroscience. These techniques provide a practical way to tap into these innate brain functions. But, and this is crucial, it's vital to understand that manifestation isn't a one-time magic trick. It requires consistent effort and the formation of new mental habits.
Like building any other skill.
Precisely. Think about New Year's resolutions. Why do so many fail? Often it's because people try to make massive, drastic changes overnight.
Yeah, go big or go home. Then go home.
Right. Real lasting change, whether it's diet, exercise, or reprogramming your thoughts, almost always comes from starting small with manageable steps that build momentum and confidence. You don't decide to run a marathon and then run 26 miles on your first day of training, do you?
No, you'd probably injure yourself.
Exactly. You start with a walk, then maybe a short jog, and you gradually build up. Similarly, with manifestation, consistent, small, daily efforts in embedding your intentions and cultivating that positive internal state are far more effective in the long run than sporadic, intense bursts followed by giving up.
I really appreciate you breaking down those brain networks
Yeah.
and explaining the science behind why these techniques can be so effective in essentially reprogramming our minds. It makes it feel much more tangible. Now, when we talk about forming new physical habits through repetition, like, say, drinking more water or going for a daily walk, those are tangible actions we can see and track.
Right, they're external.
But when it comes to something as deeply ingrained and often unconscious as negative self-talk, it can feel like a much more daunting challenge. It's not a physical habit we can easily observe externally. So going back to that common example of someone who has carried the belief, I'm not good enough, for years, maybe decades, could you provide a more detailed, step-by-step guide on how to use these brain principles and techniques you've described to start rewriting that specific narrative in their default mode network? What would that daily practice actually look like?
That's a great practical question. And the first thing to acknowledge really is that negative self-talk is an incredibly common human experience. It's probably unrealistic to expect it to vanish completely forever.
Really? Even with practice?
Well, studies suggest that the vast majority of people experience it maybe 90% or more, and the other 10% are probably just not admitting it.
Laughing slightly. Okay, fair enough.
I experience it too. The key isn't necessarily to eliminate it entirely, because thoughts will arise. The key is to change your relationship with it, to recognize it when it pops up without being automatically overwhelmed or controlled by it. That's a core principle of mindfulness, isn't it? Observing without judgment.
Okay, so recognize it, don't fuse with it.
Exactly. But beyond just observing, a crucial active step is to intentionally cultivate self-compassion. This involves actively, consciously countering those automatic negative thoughts with positive affirmations. Simple, powerful statements like, I am worthy, I am good enough, I do deserve happiness and success. Saying them, feeling them.
Talking back to the inner critic with kindness.
With kindness and conviction. Now, as we've discussed, a significant portion of our most stubborn negative self-talk often stems from the baggage we carry, the beliefs formed during our childhood experiences. And remember, we are constantly manifesting, often unconsciously, based on these deeply ingrained narratives.
Right, manifesting the not good enough feeling.
Precisely. Therefore, one of the vital initial steps is self-reflection. This could involve journaling, maybe talking with a therapist or a trusted friend, or simply taking quiet time to explore the origins of these beliefs. Asking yourself, where did I learn this story about myself? Understanding how you became you, essentially.
It's digging into the roots.
Yes. Because this awareness starts to create a distance, a separation between you and the belief. It allows you to recognize it as just that a story you've been telling yourself, perhaps one you learned from others, rather than an absolute unchangeable truth about who you are. It's somewhat akin to the psychological concept of accepting your shadow self, acknowledging and integrating those less desirable aspects or beliefs about yourself rather than trying to push them away or pretend they don't exist. Suppression often makes them stronger.
So bringing them into the light.
Bringing them into conscious awareness through reflection. That's often the necessary first step towards changing them.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, the initial foundational step is to take some time for that introspection, maybe through journaling, like you said, to identify those core negative beliefs that were likely formed, often way back in childhood. And just the act of bringing them to the surface helps us to see them more objectively as just stories rather than inherent truths about ourselves.
Exactly, creating that space, that separation.
Now, once we have that awareness, that separation, how do we actually begin to create and embed a new, more positive story? It's like you said with the marathon, or like trying to learn a new instrument, right? It takes consistent practice. What are the specific techniques we can use daily to start really rewriting that internal narrative, laying down those new neural pathways?
That's an excellent question, and the analogy is perfect. And you're right, the very first step, even before creating the new story, is often recognizing what you have already been manifesting those negative beliefs through your consistent, albeit unconscious repetition over the years.
Realizing you've been practicing the wrong thing.
Precisely. You've been practicing that negative self-talk perhaps for decades, diligently reinforcing those unhelpful neural pathways. Think of someone who repeatedly finds themselves in, say, unhealthy relationships. They might lament, why does this always happen to me? But often, digging deeper, it's because they are unconsciously manifesting those patterns based on their ingrained beliefs about love, worthiness, or what relationships are supposed to be like, learned long ago.
Manifesting the familiar pattern, even if it's painful.
Yes. So acknowledging that you have been manifesting based on the old story is key. And the empowering part is, yes, we absolutely have the power to change that narrative, to start practicing something different. And the next crucial step in creating the new stories we touched on earlier is to really get clear on the difference between what you superficially want and what you truly deeply need or value.
Okay, but it's so easy to get caught up in what we want, isn't it? Especially when society bombards us with messages about what we should want. That immediate desire for that specific outcome. The job, the car, the relationship can feel so strong and urgent.
It is. It absolutely is. And it's important to acknowledge those desires, not to deny them or feel guilty about them. There's nothing inherently wrong with wanting material things or achieving external markers of success. I mean, I enjoyed those aspects of my life as well. The key distinction, though, the one that makes all the difference for long-term well-being, is whether those things define your fundamental sense of worth. Is your happiness contingent upon getting them? Do you enjoy them, or do you need them to feel good about yourself, to feel validated?
Enjoy versus need, that's the crux.
That's the crux. Because if your sense of self-worth is dependent on acquiring external things or achieving external validation, that's where suffering often arises. It creates a constant state of striving, of anxiety, of never feeling quite good enough.
The hedonic treadmill.
Exactly. Whereas shifting your primary focus towards service, towards contributing to the well-being of others, towards living with purpose, what we've been calling heart mode, can paradoxically often lead to the availability or attainment of those desired things as a byproduct. But the primary driver should be seeking purpose and meaning, not just chasing the fleeting satisfaction of acquiring possessions or achieving status.
So focus on the why, the service, the meaning.
Yes, because chasing pleasure and avoiding pain, while natural, offers only a temporary and often shallow sense of happiness. Pursuing purpose, living in alignment with your deeper values, contributing to something larger than yourself that brings a deeper, more resonant, and lasting sense of fulfillment and well-being.
That's a really important distinction. It's about getting to a place where you feel fundamentally good about yourself, worthy and whole, regardless of your material possessions or external achievements. And understanding the difference between enjoying those things if they come and needing them to validate your worth.
You've got it. That's the foundation.
Okay. Now, just for clarity, when we talk about actively shaping our reality using these techniques, are visualization and manifestation essentially the same thing, or is there a difference?
They are very closely intertwined. I'd say visualization is a key tool or technique within the broader practice or concept of manifestation. Manifestation is the overall process of bringing an intention into reality. Visualization is one powerful way to help embed that intention.
Okay, visualization is part of the manifestation toolkit.
Got it.
So how does this science of manifestation, this whole process of embedding intentions in the subconscious, using visualization and the other senses, actually help us achieve our goals, including, let's be honest, those material desires we might still have, even if we're working on not needing them for our self-worth?
Right. Well, let me bring it back to my own experience, that list I made as a 12-year-old. As we discussed, my list of desired outcomes back then was primarily focused on those external material achievements and the validation I thought they'd bring.
Right, the millionaire status, the mansion, the Porsche, the Rolex.
Exactly. And over time, through a combination of hard work, circumstance, and applying these principles, even before I fully understood the neuroscience behind them, I actually achieved every single one of those things and more.
Every single one.
Every one. I became a neurosurgeon, a professor at Stanford, experienced significant financial success as an entrepreneur, owned multiple properties, including that house overlooking Newport Beach, a villa in Florence, the fancy cars.
Docs. Okay, I have to say, I think some people listening might be feeling a definite twinge of envy right now. It sounds like the dream life.
Laugh softly. I understand why it might sound that way, and externally it probably looked like it. But here's the crucial part of the story. The part that often gets left out of the simple manifest your dreams narrative. Despite achieving all of those external markers of success that I had listed as a kid, I was, for a long time, deeply unhappy.
Unhappy with all that.
Deeply unhappy. Because I was constantly chasing the next goal, the next achievement, the next acquisition, always hoping that that next thing would finally bring lasting satisfaction, that feeling of being okay, of being whole. But it never did. The goalposts just kept moving.
There's never enough.
It was never enough. In fact, it was only when I experienced a significant financial loss, losing a substantial amount of money, around $80 million during the dot-com crash and facing considerable debt, that I was forced into a period of really intense, painful self-reflection.
A major wake-up call.
A huge one. I realized that my entire focus, my driving force, had been on seeking that external validation. Look at me, look what I achieved, please make me feel good about myself. And that approach, as I learned the hard way, simply didn't work for genuine happiness. I ended up having to sell almost everything I had acquired. The Ferrari, the Porsche, the Range Rover, the BMW, the Mercedes, the multi-million-dollar house.
Wow, that must have been incredibly difficult.
It was humbling, to say the least. But it was during that period of loss and the subsequent decisions I made, particularly a choice regarding a significant charitable trust I had set up earlier. Well, that's when my perspective began to fundamentally shift.
What happened?
I had put about $30 million worth of stock into this charitable foundation years before, intending to use it for philanthropic purposes. When the crash happened, that stock was essentially all I had left, and my lawyer advised me I could likely unwind the trust and keep the stock to cover my debts. It was a tempting option, obviously.
I can imagine.
But after deep reflection, I decided to proceed with the original philanthropic plan, despite my own precarious financial situation. And that decision, to give away that $30 million, which went on to establish health clinics in underserved areas, programs for adolescents with HSHIB, support for the disabled, funding for research, creating endowed chairs at universities. That active giving of choosing service over self-preservation in that moment marked a profound turning point for me.
Choosing service even when facing personal loss.
Yes. It was a different kind of rags to riches story, I suppose, maybe more of a spiritual transformation than a purely financial one. I realized that all the material success hadn't actually nourished my soul, hadn't healed those deeper wounds. And the act of giving it away, paradoxically, even while facing financial hardship myself, was the catalyst for profound internal change. It eventually led me down the path to establishing the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, CCARE, at Stanford, and forming deep, meaningful connections with spiritual leaders, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
There are so many complex layers to that incredible story, and I really appreciate you sharing it with such vulnerability. I'm also thinking about our listeners, especially those who might be currently facing significant financial hardship themselves. It's understandable that there might feel like a disconnect, maybe even a bit of frustration, hearing about losing immense wealth compared to the daily grinding struggle of just trying to meet basic needs like food and shelter.
I completely understand that perspective.
We still want to help listeners grasp how they can harness these tools, these principles you're sharing, to unlock their own potential and create positive change, regardless of their current circumstances, even when survival feels paramount. How can someone who is genuinely struggling to make ends meet right now connect with these ideas, separating from past stories, choosing new beliefs, trying to live in heart mode, when money might understandably feel like the only solution to their immediate, pressing challenges?
You raise a very valid and important point, and I want to be absolutely clear that I understand the vast difference in contexts and challenges people face. My story, particularly the part about the financial recovery, is just my story. It's certainly not everyone's experience or guarantee. However, the fundamental message, I believe, remains relevant and powerful regardless of your circumstances.
Yeah.
Your belief system profoundly matters.
Even when things are really tough.
Especially when things are tough. That negative self-talk, those limiting beliefs like, it's impossible, nothing good ever happens to me, I'll never get out of this. They create that self-imposed prison we talked about. They literally shape how you perceive your options or lack thereof.
They shut down possibilities.
They absolutely do. Even in the most dire situations, when basic needs aren't being met, possibilities, maybe small ones at first, but possibilities nonetheless can begin to emerge when that crushing negative belief system is interrupted, even momentarily, when you can manage to look through a slightly different lens, a lens of possibility rather than just despair.
How does that work physiologically?
Well, think about it. When you are constantly negative, anxious, believing that it's not possible or the world is against me, it actually changes your physiology. It keeps you locked in that sympathetic fear mode. Your posture changes, your expression changes, the energy you project changes. As you probably know, our bodies emit bioelectrical energy, with a surprisingly significant electromagnetic field emanating from the heart.
The heart's energy field.
Yes. And when you cultivate positive feelings, gratitude, compassion, hope, and maintain a more positive outlook, even amidst difficulty, the quality of that energy you project has a tangible effect on your interactions with the world and the people around you. Think about people you encounter, some just radiate a warmth, a positive energy that makes you feel good being around them, right?
Definitely.
While others seem to carry this cloud of negativity or tension that makes you want to back away, we all have the capacity, I believe, to become more like the former, and it starts with intentionally changing your internal perspective, your worldview.
So changing the inside changes the outside response.
It often does. Even starting from a difficult situation, shifting your internal outlook, cultivating that heart mode as best you can open you up to seeing opportunities, solutions, or sources of support that you simply wouldn't have noticed when trapped in negativity. When I began to fundamentally change how I viewed myself and the world after my own crisis, the world, in turn, started responding differently to me. People were more willing to offer help, support, and opportunities seemed to arise more frequently. This directly relates back to that shift from fear mode to heart mode. And again, there's increasing research supporting the tangible benefits, physiological, psychological, social action, of operating more consistently in that heart mode, characterized by service, connection, and positive beliefs.
Okay, so for someone wanting to make that shift, wanting to cultivate that heart mode more often, even if it feels difficult or maybe even a bit strange at first, what are some practical steps they can take to consciously drop into that state?
Well, the very first step, conceptually, is to truly recognize that your perceived reality, how you experience the world right now, is in many ways a construct of your own mind. It's a kind of delusion, if you will, that you've unconsciously created for yourself based on past experiences and beliefs.
The chosen filter.
Exactly, a filter. And that filter can be predominantly negative, the world hates me, nothing works out. Or it can be more positive or neutral. Look at the sunshine, what can I learn today? The key is understanding that by changing how you view yourself, by cultivating self-compassion, challenging limiting beliefs, you can begin to consciously change the filter through which you perceive the world around you.
Okay, so start with the self-view. Then what?
Then, in terms of practical techniques to shift your state, start by finding a calm, quiet place if possible, where you can consciously try to shift from that agitated fear mode into a more centered heart mode. Minimize distractions, maybe avoid caffeine or other substances that might heighten anxiety right before you practice.
Set the stage.
Set the stage. Then, a simple breathing exercise can be incredibly effective in downregulating your nervous system almost immediately. Just taking a few slow, deep, controlled breaths, maybe inhaling for a count of 4, holding gently and exhaling slowly for a count of 6 or 8 can make a significant difference in calming your physiology.
The power of the breath.
It's profound. Then, once you feel a little calmer, take some time to reflect, as we discussed, on what you have already manifested in your life, both the things you like and the things you don't. And practice genuine self-compassion, especially when reflecting on past perceived mistakes or regrets. Challenge that internal voice that often wants to assign blame, saying, "It's all my fault," a feeling many children unfortunately internalize when things go wrong.
Letting go of self-blame.
Yes. Remind yourself that everyone makes mistakes, everyone faces setbacks, everyone deserves second and third and fourth chances. And remember that, at their core, most people you interact with are likely inherently kind or at least neutral, not actively malicious. Shifting that assumption can change your interactions.
Okay, what else?
Also, spend some time reflecting honestly on what truly brings you a deep sense of happiness and fulfillment. You might find, upon closer examination, that those purely material desires often pale in comparison to the desire for genuine security, connection, and well-being for yourself and your loved ones. Focus on how you can be of service, even in small ways, to your family, your friends, your community. That outward focus is powerful.
Service again.
Always. And finally, it's helpful to become aware of the Buddhist concept of attachment, or craving. Often, our intense attachment to specific outcomes, wanting things to be exactly a certain way, is a significant source of our suffering when things don't go according to plan.
Wanting it too badly makes it worse if it doesn't happen.
It can. So while setting clear goals and using manifestation techniques is valuable, cultivating a degree of non-attachment to the specific outcome, the specific timing, or the exact form it takes, is crucial for maintaining peace of mind. Trust the process, do the work, but let go of rigidly controlling the result. Sometimes things don't manifest in the way we expect or when we expect, perhaps for reasons we don't understand at the time, or even sometimes for our own ultimate good. Manifestations might not always align perfectly with our initial visualizations. Cultivate patience and maintain consistent effort without tying your entire sense of well-being to getting that one specific thing.
That's a tricky balance in tension without rigid attachment.
It is. It takes practice. I personally have intentions, things I've been nurturing for many years, that haven't fully manifested yet. And while I continue to hold the belief that they will manifest in some form, I'm also practicing non-attachment to the exact timing or appearance. The consistent practice of these techniques, combined with cultivating that heart mode, significantly increases the likelihood of your intentions coming to fruition. But it's not an ironclad guarantee for every single desire exactly as envisioned.
You mentioned earlier something fascinating, that our brain can't really distinguish between something that's vividly imagined and something that's actually happening in reality. And you said that by focusing on the feeling of success, we train our brain to expect it. Can you expand on that?
Yes. Absolutely. When you vividly imagine achieving your intention, and more importantly, you allow yourself to truly feel the emotions associated with that achievement, the joy, the relief, the gratitude, the confidence, you're activating the same neural pathways in your brain that would be activated if you were actually experiencing it in the external world.
Firing those neurons.
Exactly. You're firing and wiring those neurons for success, essentially. This strengthens those pathways and creates a kind of neurological expectation, a familiarity with that desired state. Your brain starts to recognize it as normal or possible. Moreover, as we discussed, by embedding the intention in your subconscious through this emotionalized visualization and repetition, it becomes more salient.
More important to the brain.
Right, like putting a spotlight on it. Think back to the crowded room analogy. You instantly hear your name because it holds deep personal significance. It's highly salient to you. Similarly, when an intention is deeply embedded and salient, your subconscious mind, which is constantly scanning your environment below the level of conscious awareness, starts actively searching for and noticing opportunities, resources, people, and synchronicities that align with that intention.
So that's where those coincidences come from.
That's often how those seemingly magical coincidences or synchronicities start to occur more frequently. It's not necessarily magic. It's your highly attuned subconscious recognizing and drawing your conscious attention to what has been deemed important. Your internal state is influencing your perception of external reality.
Okay, wow, that's actually a real aha moment for me right now. I think I've always, maybe unconsciously, viewed manifestation as something solely focused on achieving a future outcome, getting the thing later.
Common perspective.
But what I'm really hearing from you, loud and clear, is that the real power, the actual engine of manifestation, lies much more in the daily practice of cultivating that present moment, that internal state, that heart mode. The starting line isn't some distant goal. It's right here, right now, with this daily reset of self-acceptance, self-compassion, maybe some gratitude, and generating that feeling of love and worthiness for ourselves just as we are.
Beautifully put, yes.
And from that grounded, present, heart-centered place, then we can consciously choose the new beliefs we want to embrace. We can align with our inherent wiring for connection and service. We can clearly define what truly matters to us, our needs, not just our wants. And then we repeatedly affirm and visualize our desired outcomes and, crucially, the heartfelt reasons behind them, the why from the heart. And it feels like from that consistent present moment practice, well, maybe anything truly does become possible.
Absolutely. You've just articulated it perfectly. In that summary, you've essentially unlocked the key to the prison that so many people, sadly, unknowingly, build for themselves.
You mean that prison built by negative self-talk?
Exactly. Each negative thought, each limiting belief that goes unchallenged is like laying another brick in that prison wall, making it higher, thicker, darker over time. Yet, as you've so clearly described just now, we each hold the key to unlock that prison. That key is the process you just outlined. Self-awareness, self-compassion, intentional focus, clarifying values, consistent practice, living from the heart. It's about recognizing your own agency, your own internal power to shape your internal and, consequently, your external world, rather than feeling like a victim of circumstance or waiting for some external force to rescue you.
Taking responsibility for our inner world.
Yes, and that connects back to what I wrote in the opening of my book, that somewhat provocative statement, "The universe doesn't give a F about you," which was meant to shock people into realizing external forces aren't the primary drivers. But the concluding statement of the book is ultimately, you are the universe, meaning the power resides within you. That internal power, that agency, is the gift we all possess, waiting to be claimed.
That's incredibly empowering.
Right.
What would be your final words of guidance, your main takeaway for our listener today as they embark on, or maybe continue, this journey?
Well, first, just to acknowledge again, as we've discussed, that navigating the world through a lens of negativity, struggling with fear and self-doubt, that's a very common human experience. You are not alone in that. But beneath it all, there's that universal, fundamental longing we all share. To be seen, to be heard, to be loved, to feel a sense of belonging and connection. So, my parting thought, my practical takeaway is this. Regardless of your current circumstances, no matter how challenging they may seem, you have the capacity right now, today, to positively impact the life of at least one other person.
One person, one day.
Just one. It could be incredibly simple. A genuine smile offered to a stranger. A sincere compliment, an offer of help no matter how small, or just truly listening to someone without judgment, making them feel heard. When you consciously shift your focus outward, even for brief moments, towards how you can be of service, how you can offer kindness or support to others, it does something remarkable. It not only benefits them, but it also profoundly shifts your own internal state, your own mindset.
It gets you out of your own head.
It gets you out of your own head and into your heart. It cultivates that heart-centered approach we've been talking about, allowing you to see the world and yourself through a different lens, one filled with more possibility, more compassion, more connection. And it is from that place, that state of being, that place of an open heart, that your own intentions have the greatest power and potential to truly manifest.
Thank you. Wow. I'm truly moved by this conversation. It's been incredibly insightful and frankly, quite profound. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your personal story with us so openly.
The pleasure was genuinely all mine. Thank you for the wonderful conversation and insightful questions.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us on this deep dive. I truly hope your heart feels a little more open today after listening. And I want to say, just in case you haven't heard it yet today, I love you, and I absolutely believe in your innate ability to create the life you truly desire, starting from the inside out. I'm genuinely excited for you to take these insights and apply them in your own unique way. See you soon with another guide like this.